We'll give people a minute or two to join here. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's panel discussion titled Parenting Through the College Process. I am Doug Badger, Director of College Counseling at the Fountain Valley School in Colorado Springs, and I will serve as your moderator for this evening. This here is a picture of my wife and I just after we dropped off our younger son at college for the start of his first year. And I'll confess that we did consume quite a bit of ice cream that night. On behalf of the Rocky Mountain College Night Planning Committee from Aspen High School, Colorado Academy, the Alexander Dawson School, Fountain Valley School, Kent Denver, Peak to Peak Charter School, and the Colorado Springs School, welcome to this evening's program. Tonight, we're thrilled to have with us three fabulous panelists to offer their expertise on the topic. April Gamble is a Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio. Erica Quiggins is a Senior Associate Dean of Admissions at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. And Angela Fernandez Barone is Director of Admissions Communications at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. To begin, each of our panelists will share some words of wisdom on parenting through the college process, but we do want to be sure to address some of your questions as well. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A section, and I will ask them of our panelists. So we'll start off with our panelists. Is there one of you who wouldn't mind going first?
Sure, I'll jump in.
Thank you, Erica.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm excited to be here to tell you a little bit about my perspective, both from the college admissions counseling side and from the parent side. I have been in the college admissions profession for about 25 years now, since long before my two children were born, and I have now seen both of them through the college selection process. One recently graduated from college, so that was successful. The second is currently in his freshman year at college right now. He's actually in his bedroom right next door to where I am right now. And he has taken his whole first year virtually here. I'm sure you're familiar with that setup in your homes as well, perhaps. A few things that I would want to share right away. First off, what I have noticed with my two children is that the process was extremely different. So some of you who are watching tonight might have already been through this with one of your students, and it might end up being completely and totally different the next time around. With my daughter, she was eager to get started on the process. We could drag her onto any college campus since she was little. You know, she was ready to jump into the process as a sophomore. She was so excited. She was all about the college process. My son, on the other hand, we got to the middle of his junior year with him refusing to talk about college. He wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't think about it, nothing. And then all of a sudden, the switch flipped during winter break of his junior year. And suddenly he was making a list and he was eager to schedule visits and he wanted to talk about the college process all the time. it was amazing, just amazing. And so we jumped on those visits. We went, we scheduled them. We took a look at schools. He made his list. He was decided. He knew. He was very firm in what was first place, what was seventh place, which schools he was going to apply to. And that was it. And it all happened in a matter of a few months. The second thing that I would say is I really like the metaphor, and I've tried to live by this, of my kid being in the driver's seat during the process and me being in the passenger seat. And this was both literal and figurative. And so I was the person who scheduled the visits in some cases, the person who booked the rental cars, the flights, and in some cases kept track of the deadlines on the spreadsheet. But for the most part, I stepped back, which was very hard for me to do because I had been on the other side of this process for so many years. But I stepped back, particularly on the tours, on the visits themselves. I stood in the back of the group and waited for my student and for the other students to ask their questions first. And occasionally I would poke my kid and say, maybe you should ask about this, or maybe you should ask about that. But I left it to them. I was the passenger in this process, which was a very, very hard thing for me to do. But it ended up working out quite well, and they were able to step up and take the lead. So, okay, I'll stop there, and I'll let my other fellow panelists share their wisdom as well.
Angie or April?
Yeah, I can pick up on what you were saying, Erica. So first of all, I am a 31-year admission office veteran whose world was turned upside down when I saw my own children through the process, right? The process I thought I knew so well, I really came at in a whole new way as I helped my daughters through. And I was laughing as you were talking, Erica, because I had and maybe there's a birth order pattern here, but I had a firstborn who I had to tell in middle school that she didn't need to worry about SATs yet, right? It was like, take it down a notch. Don't need to be this worried about it. And then children who followed who were really okay with letting it ride for a while and not getting too caught up in the whole thing. And similarly, I had my very first college tour with my eldest. I said to her privately beforehand, do you want me to just keep quiet? Do you want me to ask questions? And, just to kind of be in a good place with her and give her the space that she needed. And her response to me was, you have dealt with this process and you're familiar with college campuses and services. And I want you to ask questions. My second daughter, the first tour, she looked at me with the most horrified face and was like, Mom, you can't say a word. So that whole idea of you really have to come to some agreements with, strike a balance with the personality of the particular child and not assume that process that you're moving through with them will look like a particular thing. And I think that brings me to two thoughts that I want to share. One is that this is a really important moment in our students' lives, and it's not just an important moment in building their future resume. It's an important moment developmentally and emotionally, and they're making big decisions and they're going through big changes. So I think as a parent partnering with your student through this process, that being in the passenger seat, but being a good active passenger, right? Helping and supporting, but most of all listening, so that you can really get a good sense of where your student is in the process and try. And this is my other thought. It's so important that we meet them where they are and not try to push them to where we think they ought to be. Meeting them where they are so that we could just be in that moment with them and help them with the kind of self-reflection that will be the foundation for a really good, successful college search. We don't know what the outcome ought to be. Try to let go of what it ought to be, and just be in the moment with your student. And I think that that commitment to a healthy college search process is a really critical one. And I think we send our students a really important message when we commit to them and where they are and supporting them and not driving the process.
Hey,
Thank you, Angie.
those were wonderful reflections. And funnily enough, I have two kids who are also in college very recently. So we've all gone through this together, and they were also quite different in how they approached their search. I think it's important this year to start off by acknowledging how how hard of a year it has been for so many families and so many communities, and that the college visits that maybe you dreamed of doing, that you thought you would do, might not have happened. There are, everyone's doing these wonderful virtual opportunities, and many, many colleges are opening up for visits, late this spring or this summer, or hopefully in the fall. So yeah, just throwing that out, that that's a disappointment too. I wasn't able to travel at all with my daughter. She is going to college sight unseen next year. So just, helping our kids be resilient, but also acknowledging, that that's something else that they missed out on. Are these college visits. So one thing I thought was really interesting, not just observing my own kids as they went through this process, but working with kids at college, is having kids figure out what values are important to them, what matters to them, and how will they find that? How will they figure that out? If diversity of opinion and diversity of thought is important to you, what will that look like on a college campus? How can you figure that out? Yes, you can figure that out sometimes through a visit or through a virtual experience, but it also takes some research. Look at the percentage of kids at your school who are, for example, Pell eligible, or look at the racial diversity or the religious diversity at the college, if those are things that matter to you. The other thing I think it's really important, and I'm a huge fan, and I'm sure Eric and Angie and Doug know this book, of Ron Lieber's new book, The Price You Pay for College. I think there's some conversations that are really important for families to have with their kids about cost. Because I think that although merit aid and financial aid, there are wonderful possibilities and wonderful opportunities that sometimes people don't know about. I think it's important, from the very beginning for families to have that conversation. Some kids have no idea how much college costs. And one of the reasons that has been a challenge is some kids have no idea how much money there is in their family. For some families, finances are very private, and it's not something you talk about with your kids. I think both of our kids were a little both shocked and fascinated to find out actually how much both their mom and dad earned, but that helped us shape our conversation about college. So if you can have that conversation, if you're able to, given your own family dynamic, it's an interesting one to have. How much do you want to pay for college? How much of a strain or a burden or a borrower do you want to be? Are there, is this a kind of situation where you talk about other people in your family who might be supportive of your child's decision to go off to college? So yeah, the visits and the, everything else, and letting your child lead the way, but also being, having that framework about financial kind of issues, I think is important too. I loved hearing your stories, Eric and Angie. It's so fun to hear about your own, experiences with your kids, because we do learn a lot as professionals when we do it ourselves.
I think that's absolutely true. And just to add a little bit to my story, so the picture you saw was when we dropped my younger son off to college. I spent nearly 20 years working in selective college admission offices before I came to Fountain Valley to do college counseling. And my older son school was never easy or enjoyable for him. And he was not interested in going to college. And I'll say, after I had made my life's work, essentially doing college admissions, that's challenging. And, it's taken him some time, but he's found his way. And, I think he's done what's right for him, which has been good. So, and my younger son, in contrast, I took him and about 15 of his friends on a school college tour for a week, and visited a whole bunch of colleges. And then he and I also went separately and visited some colleges on our own. But yeah, trying to do some of the things that you described of, letting the students take take control of the process is it's not always easy, but I think it's truly important. We do have one question here so far from folks in the audience, and just as a reminder, if you have questions that you'd like to ask of our panelists, we'd love to try and help you with your specific questions and concerns. Feel free to type them in the Q&A feature here in Zoom. But the first question is, how important are college visits, especially during this crazy COVID time? Should I push for visiting the actual campus, or are virtual visits enough for right now? Who wants to take that one?
I'll start really quickly on that one and make sure to hear from Angie and Erica too. Just starting out by acknowledging that it's a privilege to be able to travel and visit. It's not something that all families can do. I think many colleges, I'll speak for the College of Worcester, we learned how deficient we were in terms of virtual visits for folks who can't come. We have a lot of international students at Worcester, and most of them never visit before they come. So visiting in person does offer some amazing chances to learn not just about the college, but the community that the college is located in. But not everybody can do that. And especially now, not everybody feels safe doing that.
I would say that one of the fabulous outcomes, unintentional outcomes of how we have shifted within the past year in how we do admissions is that there are so many more virtual opportunities now. And so I think that it actually could work well. I'm guessing that the majority of you who are watching have students who are juniors right now, perhaps even maybe sophomores, but kind of beginning this process, not seniors who are just ending the process. But I think it could work very well to utilize those virtual visit options to cast the net widely to begin the college search, to connect with lots of different types of schools and to go on those virtual visits, because really you're only sacrificing an hour or so of your time then to figure out what type of school, what locations, what might be a good match for you before you get to the investment of trying to figure out how to actually set foot on campus. And yes, I do think that colleges will be opening up to wider opportunities for in-person visits. I know at Lewis and Clark right now, we are only focusing on seniors visiting because we are so limited in the number of visitors that we can allow on campus. But that's going to shift this summer and into the fall. And so once students have kind of cast the net widely, looking at schools through the virtual options, narrowing it down to the schools that you actually want to really make the investment in visiting in person could be a very good way of going about the process.
And I agree completely. I just want to add that in the same way, so I described two daughters who had very different opinions of what my role should be on their college tours. But I think in both cases, me being the extra set of eyes in the experience with the campus meant that we could have some really good conversations afterwards. Maybe I picked up on some different things. And so we kind of come together in conversation. So my only other thought is, I think these virtual opportunities right now are fantastic, and there will be opportunities for in-person visits later. But if you can join your student for some of those virtual programs, I think there's opportunity to feed that conversation and ask important questions, opportunity for you to be another set of eyes for your student.
I'd agree wholeheartedly. I think that these virtual opportunities a year ago or a little bit more, I would have said, are maybe not worth the time. But I think it's very different now. Colleges have adapted very well, and especially for somebody who's earlier in the process, I think taking advantage of these opportunities to see a wide variety of places without great expense or commitment is really handy. We have a few other questions here. So the next one is, what's the best way to research colleges, especially for somebody who's early on in the process?
Well, I'll just start by putting a little plug in for the fact that I know that every single one of you has a student who attends a school with fabulous college counselors. So start by having the conversation with them and you know, looking at what types of places would be a good match, and then start heading to the college websites to connect and do some further research. And Doug did not pay me to make that plug there.
But thanks anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. Use those resources close to home, the resources at school, starting with that college counselor, but also, you know, teachers in a favorite subject area who might have ideas of where you could pursue the interests that you're thinking about. There are certainly some good search engines out there that would allow you to put in criteria. You know, I'm looking for large, medium, small, urban, rural, has to have this kind of program. There's certainly some good programs out there, but I want to go back to what Erica said before. I think there's real value in trying to experience different types of places, not just saying, well, if I had to guess, I think I'd want a medium-sized place, right? But trying to have some experiences that help you test that leaning that the student might have. So I think there's, yeah, I think there are some good search engines out there, but if you can work with the humans that are there in your school, they're going to be your best advisors.
Another question. I know it's important to have a range of schools stretch and maybe more likely to get in. Do you have any suggestions on the number of schools to have in those ranges and acceptance rate criteria that determine those ranges?
I'm going to go to what Erica said before, which is that your counselors that, you know, your high school are going to have some experience with, you know, what's worked for kids from your school, from your area. You know, in the end, it's your family's decision how many schools you all are going to apply to and what kind of reach you're looking for. So that's an individual question. You know, on a personal level, my kids each ended up feeling like they were ready to apply ED, so they ended up applying to one school. But I think, you know, their friends at their large local public high school, I would say applied to more like 4 or 5 colleges. But again, it's hard to just give a number.
My kids each ended up applying to about 6 or 7. They had a few schools that were more of a financial backup, and then schools that they felt like might be a little more of a reach financially as well as academically. And but I have worked with students over the years who have applied to a lot more than 6 or 7. And at that point, you know, when you see students applying to more than 10, 12, 15 colleges, it's sometimes a waste of time for those students because they're going to have to be filling out all of those applications, a waste of the time of the people who are reading all of those applications, because I can say that I am one of those people. We are all those people who actually do sit down and do a very holistic review of every application that we receive. It's not a computer that's deciding if your student's going to be admissible or not. But also money. Most schools do charge an application fee, and it's going to be $50, $70, $90, $100 for each school to which your student is applying.
And if you're not thinking of the number of acceptances that your student gets as a badge of honor, but thinking realistically about a decision-making process, they don't want 15 options in the month of April to make a final decision between. It's too much. So it's, you know, it's kind of like tightening up your thesis statement for a paper, right? Like you want to get it really solid and tight, a good group of schools. But I wanted to just highlight something Erica said that I think is really important, and that is that people often think of like reach schools and safety schools in terms of admissibility, but the financial reach and the financial safety school is another lens that you could put on that list. And again, I think the college counselor in your school is the ideal person to talk with about that, because they know what's worked for students who are taking the kind of academic program that you're taking, maybe have a rank in class or have a grade point average that's similar to yours, so that they can give you a more nuanced sense of what you should think of as a reach school or a safety school.
Yeah, just to echo Eric and Angie too, I think that for students who are accepted into, many of these colleges, then it's really hard to get to know all of them. If you've been accepted to 8 schools, it's really hard to do research and get to know 8 schools in order to make your decision. If it's a choice between 3 or 4 colleges, your child has a much better way of getting to know the institution, learning about programs they're interested in. It really gives your child, I think, a deeper and a better understanding of their choices.
Next question, how important is it for a student and family to get to know the admission officer, and how do we contact them?
It's interesting. I think we're all from places where there is advantage in doing that, but it's not true everywhere. In smaller colleges especially, there will be someone who works with your school or with your part of the alphabet, but there will be like your person. And I think in many cases, that's the person who will bring your application forward through the process. So meeting with that person, contacting that person through that process of learning about the place is also giving that person another opportunity to get to know you and then to be an advocate for you as you move through the admission process. Would you say that's true in your environments and your campuses too, Erica and April?
I would definitely. And I would also say that a question that really should go hand in hand with this one is not just should you get to know your admissions counselor, but also should you think about interviewing? And the answer to that is going to be different at every school. At Lewis and Clark, we recommend interviews, and you are likely, if possible, to be interviewing with me, the person who is going to be reading your application first. At some schools, interviews are not offered. At some, they are required. So it's very important to not only think about getting to know your admissions counselor, but also making sure that your student is aware of the situation regarding interviews and getting to know their counselor that way as well.
And that's great contact for your student to also have. Learning, for my daughter, being able to email a counselor, thinking about how to address that person, how formal her email needed to be, it was a really, she figured it out. But, how long should an email be if you're asking a question that has a 1-word answer? If you're asking, a more complicated question, just writing the email was interesting for her.
We have another question. What is the best way to find these virtual experiences that admission offices offer, and how best to approach this and make the kids feel less overwhelmed?
I think the first part, there's an easy answer, the college website. If you are on a college website and search for virtual opportunities, or just search visit and look at what the in-person and virtual options are, I think that's the best place to find those.
I think my personal opinion on the second part of how to help kids feel less overwhelmed with this is, I think for the first time or two, they will feel overwhelmed, but it gets better with practice. And so I think, sometimes it's just jumping in with 2 feet to that first one or first 2, and then the rest get easier, exponentially, I think.
And this is an obvious thing to say, but I think it's fine to acknowledge to your student, this is overwhelming for you, isn't it? Or you may be feeling overwhelmed right now. How can we limit it to once a week or twice a week, during the summer or something like that? Sort of, so set guidelines and parameters for yourself, so you're not, so it doesn't feel like just a giant, cloud up there. You can narrow down what you want to do time-wise and structure it.
One of the really good pieces of advice that I was given when I was seeing my first child through the process was, don't let this be the dinner table conversation every night. that will make it overwhelming. Like, give them a little room to breathe. And even if you're worried about process and deadlines and steps, kind of step back and don't let it be the thing that takes over every day and every conversation.
Angie, you might have received the same advice that I did from Jennifer Delahunty, formerly at Kenyon. And she said that when her daughter was going through the process, they made an agreement that they would talk about college stuff one day a week, and the rest of the time it was off limits. And that, I think, helped save them through the process. And certainly I think in my family was helpful as well.
I think what's hard for kids, though, is we need to remember that it's not just the parents or guardians asking them questions constantly about college. It's their peers, it's their, it's their teachers sometimes, it's their neighbors, it's their religious leaders. So sometimes everybody needs to be told, your kid needs to learn how to say, I don't want to talk about this right now, or I'd rather talk about what I'm doing in school right now, or, I'd rather listen to music right now. It's okay to put limits on other people. I know this is a goofy thing to say, but it was like, what I remember when I got married and people would say like, well, when are you having kids? And you'd be like, I'm not ready to talk about that. Your kid can say to someone, I'm not really in the mood to talk about college right now, but, find something else they do want to talk about.
That's good advice. There's a question asking the pros and cons to early decision related to financial aid. Is there a benefit with financial aid in terms of applying early decision? Is there a drawback to applying early decision with financial aid?
Yeah, absolutely. They're both. I would say that the huge drawback of applying early decision is you don't get that opportunity to compare admissions offers and to compare financial aid packages and scholarships. That's the huge drawback. The huge benefit, though, is why you actually might get a little bit stronger scholarship or financial aid because you have expressed to the college that you are very, very, very interested. In fact, you are so interested that you are ready to commit right now. And you also head off some of that stress of comparing offers. So yeah, there are pros and cons.
Ditto. You captured it perfectly, Erica. Absolutely.
Another comment and question. I know this year saw a record number of applications to college due to test optional and waived application fees. Many students reported not getting into their match or even safety schools due to this, as well as deferred students limiting spaces. Do you see this carrying over to next year's applicants?
I'll jump in on that. So I think the test score part of that question it is a tricky one to answer. I don't think that not having test scores is what kept certain kids from getting accepted to certain colleges. And I'll be really honest and say that most colleges are not going to go, most small liberal arts colleges are going to stay test optional. And I think that's something that is very hard for some families to get beyond because their children have been successful on certain kinds of standardized tests. But I think many liberal arts colleges have done the research and have realized that test scores are not really the best way to look at a student, that they have weighed perhaps too heavily in years past on how students were admitted and what kind of merit aid or specific scholarships they received. Again, I think it's a really hard thing because I think for years and years, families have put efforts into helping students be successful on things like ACTs or SATs or PSATs. I'm not trying to be flippant about this, but don't worry, there's still lots of standardized tests your kids will take, maybe AP, maybe IB, but I think ACT, SAT, and ACT, at least from many liberal arts colleges, are gone from the picture in many, many ways.
I really appreciate what you said there, April, because my first thought hearing that question was, I think we're going to get more back to normal. I think in the course of this coming year, things are going to be more normal, but what I think of as normal is test optional. And so I think there is a movement that preceded the pandemic and that will continue. And I think what April's suggesting here is absolutely what we're going to see. And there will be, you know, as test optional continues, rolls forward, there are opportunities to put your test scores out there for colleges or to not put them out there. I mean, that's what test optional is all about, giving students the freedom to submit scores or not. I do think that some of that feeling of unexpected decisions this year that were the result of really surges in applications at some of the most selective places, I think that's going to settle down after this year. I think folks are going to, I think some of those places going test optional gave applicants the feeling that like, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to give that a shot. And then of course, application numbers go through the roof. I think that's going to settle back down.
We have time for just one or two more questions perhaps before we have to wrap up. Another one is, we have a junior who's an elite athlete, a gifted and talented student, and a student pilot. Despite his strong aptitude, he's not quite fully engaged himself academically and hasn't flipped the switch yet in terms of getting excited about college. We're slightly panicked about his ability to handle college. How would you advise us to support him as he navigates his options?
I would offer that this is not a terribly unusual story, right? A teenager that's not yet fully embraced realizing their potential. This is not an unusual thing. It's not something that any college admission officer would find a foreign concept. But I think you want to have conversations with your student. You want to make sure your student's ready to take on this challenge, right? They're going to really take it up to the next level in terms of academic demand going onto a college or university campus. And you want to make sure that they're ready for that. So I think those conversations that get at readiness, and this doesn't have to mean they know exactly what they want to pursue. They could definitely be undecided and very ready for college. But think about things like, you know, gap years are amazing experiences. And if a student is kind of like just finding their way to, I'm ready to really grab onto this next opportunity, a gap year could be a great way for them to get out and experience some things and get themselves to a good place.
One question that probably a lot of people are wondering about is, if testing is gone, what are the biggest factors that you consider at this point?
That's a great question. And it's fun that we're all small liberal arts colleges answering that. I mean, so when Erica was saying we read applications, yes, all, you know, we're holistic. We look at what you do outside of the classroom too. We look at your family responsibilities. We look at your interest in our college too, you know, beyond your grades and your transcript, your teacher, your counselor recommendations, your essay. Yeah.
I will just toss in there. At Lewis and Clark, we've been reading applications without test scores for about 25 years now. We have been a test optional school for a very, very, very long time because we know that for most students, the best indicator of how well they're going to do the next 4 years is actually how well they've done the past 4 years overall, including those upward or downward trends and those sorts of things. But the test scores aren't the best indicator of how well they're likely to do. And so we have always focused much more closely on the transcript, on the curricular choices, on also what that student is likely to contribute as a community member. That's important to us.
I agree
Well-
completely. And Dickinson is a place that's been test optional since the mid 90s, right? Just for a long, long time. But I hope what you're hearing in all of this, there are so many other pieces that we'll pull together. I hope what you're hearing is that this is a very human process, right? It's not a number. You don't get a number, kind of a label put on you as a student, and that's the whole of our view of who you are and what you're capable of. It's all of these pieces coming together, and it's a very, very human process and humane.
Well, we're about out of time. I appreciate so much our panelists being willing to spend some of their time with us and share their wisdom with us. Thank you for all of you in the audience for taking the time to come and visit. You're more than welcome to, in fact, we encourage you to attend another session beginning in just under 10 minutes. If you need to register, the address is here on the screen, but otherwise, thank you all so much and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.